Acolytes. One of the most beautiful games and best games of all our generation doesn't exist. Clair Obscura. Expedition 33. By the way, I played it, loved it. Favorite character, Luna. Best waifu. Acolytes. Even a Lich needs a waifu every few couple thousand of years. And Luna, worth it. But, let's just see.
I can't believe that this has happened already. It is sad is what it is, because it's only been a month since I made a video saying that I knew that these indie titles were going to be viewed as a threat by the rest of the industry, because they expose, their success exposes that you don't need 300 to 1,000 developers to be able to make a great...
By the way, Legendary Drops here has a point. And this is actually something that he predicted that indie games gonna be a threat. By the way, I don't want to take anything away from him, but any logically thinking person would have thought that and thinks the exact same way. Even Acolytes, some of mine, close or unclose undead, that aren't actually in this entire thing where they inform themselves about gaming and stuff, even they were like, wait, Clair Obscura, what the fuck? Are you honestly? This is something that actually baffled a lot of people. And if you say to them, well, I mean, this was a relatively small team of about 33 people, well, they are baffled, because this is something that I said since a long time. Too many cooks destroy the dish. And Legendary Drop was on point here.
Great game. No, in most cases, these guys have way too many cooks in the kitchen. They're spending way too much money, and all they're doing is delivering slop in return. And with a slew of indie successes that we've seen over the last couple of years, and also probably some more of them that are down the road, now with this year's Summer Games Fest, things have escalated a lot. Because Jeff Keighley walked out onto stage and congratulated these studios, talked about how small they are and what they accomplished, and then compared their sales to AAA games on a big graphic in the background.
Nice.
That's not good. That made a lot of people very upset. So much so that it has now changed the rhetoric around this conversation. See, our discussions around these successes and how small these teams are, that's irresponsible, and it's going to lead us down a dangerous path. Fear-mongering to protect bad and expensive games, apparently. But don't worry, they have a way to fix it. See, all you need to do is just tell the players that all of your complaints, all of your concerns, all of these bad games that have failed that we've seen over the last couple of years, that's not your problem. You don't need to understand. It's not your game. So today what we're going to do is we're going to discuss these...
Honestly. Okay, you know what? I give him the point. I don't have to understand how a video game is made. I don't have to understand what's behind this. I don't have to understand or even know how many people did it. But you know what? I know that if somebody shits in front of me and somebody else gives me a nice mid-rare freaking steak and tells that the shit was made by 30 cooks and it costs €1,000, and the well-made rare steak was made by one cook and costs about freaking €10 with everything else, I'm gonna get the freaking steak. And I don't have to understand how it's fucking made. I'm gonna pay for the good stuff. And I am happy that Clair Obscura is one of the freaking games that actually exposed this.
This dangerous path that we're headed down right now because of all of these indie successes, and how apparently you need to stop worrying about things that don't concern you. Just because you bought the car doesn't mean you need to understand how it works.
Parasite.
But before that, a word from today's sponsor. If you guys have been following this channel, you guys know that I've been working out every single week since the start of this year, and I haven't missed a single day yet. By the way, dividends are starting to pay off. With that said, my biggest weakness is my diet. I am lazy, and I just don't feel like cooking, and more times than not, I work weird hours. It's the middle of the night right now, and luckily for me, I have Factor. Factor has actually helped me rein my diet in. I've been using it for high protein lunches and dinners, and I'm not gonna lie, I was actually shocked at how good this food tastes. I mean, genuinely surprised. I expected it to be relatively bland or dry because that's how most of these prep meals usually are, but it's the opposite.
True.
It almost feels like I'm cheating because that's how good
And
these
by
are.
the way, for
I've
F's
also
sake,
been loving
just
their cold
this
pressed juice.
entire
It's perfect
thing.
for when I need something quick and healthy, but
So, just to tell you something, I actually met a person that has those dishes. And this person told me, hey, it's a little bit expensive, but it is what it is. Those dishes are actually quite good. But as I said, it's relatively expensive. But before you actually take orders from different things, get this and you're better off health-wise.
updates through the PlayStation State of Play, the Xbox Direct, and the Summer Games Fest, while AAA publishers were in attendance with some genuinely solid offerings coming on down the pipeline. I am so stoked for Resident Evil 9, by the way. Little known fact, that's actually one of my most favorite game series of all time. But one of the things that really should have stood out to a lot of people is how many more indie and AA games were shown, and in some cases, garnered more attention. In fact, in Jeff Keighley's intro into the Summer Games Fest, he painted the picture of a thriving, democratized industry, highlighting games like Repo and Schedule 1 as breakout indie successes made by tiny teams and standing next to major AAA releases like the Oblivion.
I mean, okay, so he just... Why is Monster Hunter Wilds in this? Split Fiction, I don't know it. Not really. Civilization, is this an indie? Civilization 7. I don't think this counts as indie. Oblivion, definitively not an indie. Can I count Deliverance on the other hand? Indie. Elden Ring, definitively not indie. Schedule 1, indie SF. Acolytes. Indie SF.
Oblivion Remaster and Monster Hunter Wilds in sales. He also celebrated Clair Obscur as a masterpiece developed by under 30 developers who broke away from big publishers. He framed it as proof of some of today's most innovative projects coming from outside of the traditional system thanks to tools like Unreal and digital distribution. Now, to any normal person that was watching this show, this was just heartfelt appreciation, a tribute to the indie scene and what they've been able to accomplish. It's showing just how accessible and, more importantly, how possible it is to find success in the games industry regardless of your team size. However, to a few in AAA as well as in the media, Keighley's appreciation and his choice of words were seen as dangerous. In an article written by Lincoln Carpenter, a PC gamer titled "No Jeff Keighley, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 was not made by under 30 developers, and devs say repeating the myth is a dangerous path. SGF's fascination with small staff sizes discredits the integral work of external contractors and contributors." Lincoln writes, while opening last night's Summer Games Fest showcase, host and Game Awards founder Jeff Keighley noted how 2025 had been marked by the surprise successes of smaller game projects, alongside indie creations that stand side by side with heavyweights. Keighley shouted out Clair Obscur Expedition 33 from Sandfall Interactive, which he called a monumental achievement made by a team of under 30 developers. Given Clair Obscur's critical reception and its millions in sales, it's compelling to think that fewer than 36 people could produce such a success. That under 30 developers figure has been circulated in conversation and in coverage. It's a claim that we quoted from the game's creative director in our own press release reporting. It's an inspiring idea. It's also factually incorrect. They go on to say that while Sandfall's core team is indeed around 30 developers, less than half of the game's total credits belong to them. The rest are attributed to external contractors, animation teams, QA teams, porting studios, localization staff, audio producers, playtesters, and more, whose contributions were essential to the game's overall success. They then write, acknowledging those contributions detracts nothing from Clair Obscur's achievement. It is by an overwhelming majority of accounts a good-ass video game, and Sandfall's core team should be celebrated for that, but misrepresenting the scale of its production intentionally or otherwise draws an implicit distinction between what does and doesn't qualify as real game development. If you're justifiably annoyed when a game launches as a buggy mess, you should want the contributions of QA testers who do the complex work of identifying those bugs before release to be properly credited and valued. Otherwise, that integral labor in QA and localization and compatibility testing is seen as disposable, a perception that contributes to abusive working conditions in overseas contractor studios and drives the recent unionization efforts in the US. Game developers on Blue Sky reacted with frustration and discomfort to Summer Games Fest 2025.
By the way, I just have to chime in. The unionization thing just was destroyed by very bad actors. It's just done at this point. Sorry about... I mean, Acolytes... A union is something good, in my opinion. But it gets abused right now to such a high degree that, if I'm honest, if I was a gigantic freaking company and I heard union worker, I would say F off. Just because it doesn't... And it's not because it forces me to actually treat them good. It's just because this toxicity that I would have out of it, I just wouldn't give a F about it. And last year, if you asked me the same question, I would say, nope, only union workers. Simple as that. But okay.
Preoccupation with the mythological small development team. It's incredibly noticeable how often an army of outsources outside of America and Western Europe is left out of these team sizes, said director of Bithell Games.
Because big companies want that. Nobody actually says that out loud. Nobody does it. And big companies do it exactly the same way. They don't actually say that how many people did this, because it would sound like shit. Simple as that. And you just look at the end credits if you want to see the voice actors and blah and bloop. And by the way, those people also did a freaking good job. Freaking good job. Not gonna lie. But of course, some things are outsourced because not everybody can do everything. But also too many cooks F up the dish. So I don't care. I'm gonna be honest. They still did it with a small amount, way smaller amount of people than big companies can. So kudos to them.
Games founder Mike Bithell. That's the part I find real uncomfortable. Balatro creator Local Thunk noted that he too is often credited as one guy who made Balatro, which he says contributes to a David versus Goliath narrative that has been oversimplified. TVGS, the developer of Schedule 1, was also shouted out as a solo developer by Jeff Keighley during last night's Summer Games Fest. Schedule 1's in-game credits show that the art and music was provided by 2 other contributors. No, it was not one guy, Local Thunk said. Look at the dang in-game credits. I was really uncomfortable with this part as well, and it's not just because the math doesn't math. One dev plus 9 friends working with him is 10 people, not one, said games licensing producer and consultant Mike Futter, referencing a moment at Summer Games Fest when Keighley described an upcoming brawler, Acts of Blood, being made by a solo developer in Indonesia with the help of 9 friends. Expedition 33 is a triumph, but it wasn't made by 30 people. Contractors provided vital labor. This is a dangerous path that we're walking, Futter said. It's not hard to imagine in which ways repeating the myth of Clair Obscur's team size could contribute to worse conditions for games and for the people developing them. If publishers and investors are convinced that games like Expedition 33 were made with only 30 developers, they will be less inclined to support the necessary staff and production budgets that development projects require, regardless of whether it's true. Good, fucking good, I hope.
Yes. F those parasites. F all of them. Every single one of them. F them.
Hope that they're paying attention to this. Also, take notice of the guy in the retweet. It feels kind of fucked up, not because they're often misrepresenting the real size of these teams, but because I think it plays directly into a newish flavor of dev hate. Celebrating indie successes is a new kind of hate for game developers.
Yeah.
What are you guys on?
Correctly. And just the logic behind it. Gamers are celebrating the game developers that do it, but it's a pure hate thing against developers. Yeah, the logic doesn't logic.
Developers on Blue Sky reacted with frustration and discomfort. Oh, yeah, wow, what a shocker. We've never seen that before. Industry folks taking issue because players are excited that something doesn't involve 1,000 developers and $1 billion budget. These guys weren't upset because anybody lied. They were upset because for a moment, the spotlight moved away from these massive teams and onto these smaller, more focused ones. And if that message spreads, that's a real problem. If investors start seeing these leaner projects as the future, it threatens the entire foundation that these guys have built their careers on. Sucks to be you. Can we not pretend like players are idiots? Nobody thinks that these games are made in total isolation. We know that these teams use external help. QA, localizers, voice actors, publishing support. What makes this conversation so dishonest is the implication that acknowledging a small team's success somehow erases those people. It doesn't. It just draws a clear line between core development and support. That distinction matters. Because the core team is where the game is defined. They are the ones making the system, setting the tone, deciding what the experience even is. Everyone else, while valuable, steps in to help polish and execute on that vision. They are not the ones driving it. It's not disrespectful to say that. It's just recognizing the difference between creative ownership and contracted labor. Maybe you don't need a staff of 300 people and a budget of $200 million to make something great. Maybe less does actually mean better. And if that catches on, that is a problem, because for people whose value is tied to these studios' scale, not impact, they're going to start losing relevance. That's what really bothers these guys. Not that players are confused, but that players are waking up to just how unnecessary all of this excess is, because we are the ones that are paying for it. Prices are going up, monetization's getting worse, and it's not a mystery. These publishers cannot sustain their own bloat, their own size. So they have to shift the costs onto us. It is not sustainable. It's not ethical. And no amount of carefully worded articles is going to change that.
Yep.
So when these guys lash out, it's not really about protecting labor. It's about protecting their place within the system.
Yes.
Because credit to them isn't just recognition. It's job security. It's relevance. And they know if they were credited based solely on their creative contribution, not headcount or job title, a lot of them would vanish from this conversation entirely.
True.
Oh, LD, how could you say something like that? Well, I mean, this entire article wants to talk about the credit of a success. All of these.
How can you say something like that? Because it's true. It is.
These people deserve credit. If that's what this was really all about, how important their efforts are, then why isn't accountability in this conversation? Oh, that's right, because none of these people would ever have to face it. Only the core creatives would. So I guess they're only important when the game succeeds, not when it fails. What I find hilarious is how reactionary this entire article is and how it fails to rewrite the story before it gets away from them. And what's even funnier is how shallow their reading of the situation actually is, because directly after Keighley's celebration of indie titles, what did we see? Mortal Shell 2, a sequel from a studio that grew off of the back of a lean first project from 4 developers up to 30.
Yep.
Then we saw Munfish, Atomic Heart developers, who scaled up from their first success and are now building not 1, but 2 massive projects. So if this small team model is so dangerous, why does it keep resulting in cheaper games and more jobs, not fewer? They say that...
Simple, because it's not dangerous, it just gets rid of the parasites. The parasites have to actually go and work at McDonald's, where they belong, and then, well, think about what they actually did or didn't do correctly. And a lot of those parasites just don't want to do that.
Promoting the myth of a 30-person development team might lead to investors cutting budgets. That's not a warning, that's a threat. That's the slippery slope fallacy in full effect. If you keep saying that these games are made by smaller teams, then the industry will collapse. No, what will actually happen is these publishers will stop wasting their money hiring for roles that they don't need. They'll stop inflating their headcounts to justify their inflated budgets, and that shift will create more work for external contractors, more projects, and more financial flexibility for people pretty much across the board. This is the part that the industry doesn't want to admit. Smaller teams don't just produce better games, they produce more games faster, cleaner, and cheaper. With cleaner creative direction, keeping the studio lean like Sandfall did means that the vision isn't being filtered through 40 layers of producers and marketing executives. That's why Expedition 33 resonated, because it was focused. But instead of confronting that, they would rather guilt trip you. They say that if you support this narrative, if you continue to perpetuate it, then you are complicit in abuse, that you're encouraging exploitation just by getting excited over a well-made indie title. That's an appeal to guilt, and it's pathetic. When I hear people want to push back on this so-called small team fallacy, I know exactly what this is. It's self-preservation. Anyone can see it. It's because these small teams have basically exposed a truth that people are not comfortable with, which is that there is a difference between skill and talent. There's a difference between skilled labor, skilled game developers, and talented creatives that know how to actually make something that people want to play. Big studios can't touch that. They can't replicate it because their core creatives, their most talented people, in a lot of cases, are buried under layers of scale. Yes. Or they're just pushed out of the system entirely, which then they go on to make their own studios, and these are some of the games that these guys...
Yeah, they're pushed out of the system entirely or suppressed because the parasites... If a parasite sees that you're actually doing a good job, acolytes, the parasite tries to consume your presence and the host that it's attached to, and just tries to whisper bad things about you in them so they don't get risky in the job. Because at some point, it will be a point in any company's freaking days that you will have to fire people. Even if you're a good, well-meant company, it will come a day where the company just won't run as good and hard decisions have to be made. And a parasite that's attached to somebody or knows somebody will be less likely to get fired than somebody that someone just doesn't know. Simple as that. Even if it's a parasite, a useless parasite. That's just how this works. That's why I always say, one of the most important skills, acolytes, that you can have in a job are social skills. And yes, it sounds a bit, because shouldn't it actually only your work conformant matter? It should. Purely how good your work should matter. It should be the only criticism. And after, if you have then the freaking thing where it's like, okay, good, this person's this and this good, and yeah, then the next one. But social engagement and how you talk to people is just way more important in most cases. Let's just say it like this. And of course, if you're a total a-hole, just, I don't care how good you work, you're gonna get kicked. But if you're a normal human being, just do your job. And also, if you're very good at your job, you can allow yourself way more. And you should, to a certain degree. Because that actually, as freaking stupid as it is, reflects or shows strength, and that people cannot F with you. And if they do, you're gonna crush them. Yeah, I know. I learned this the hard way.
Guys are making. Smaller teams succeed specifically because the fact they're not mixing all of these people. You have to keep in mind that even though some of these guys might not be working right next to one another, just being in the same building in some cases will cause a lot of bleed over, because people want to be more involved. People want to get promotions. People want to put their thumbprint on whatever that game is going to be. Smaller teams succeed because the vision isn't polluted. They get to protect it.
That's
the creative direction of the game is isolated from the supporting labor. That's not a slight, by the way. That's just reality. That's just structure. That's management, proper management. And it's why these indie games feel far more cohesive, and in a lot of cases, why these AAA games feel like they're completely lost before they even launch. The more this indie thing works, the more it starts to threaten AAA, because these massive studios have tied their value to scale. And what I mean by that is that we are not paying for quality anymore. We are paying for their budgets.
Correctly.
That's a problem.
On point.
So anytime that these games... Anytime that players start asking the right questions about budget, about scale, about the developers that they're hiring, well, it puts the entire system under a microscope, and they can't handle that. They really can't, because they don't even know they don't even know what to do about it. That's why we're seeing the media right now standing up to tell us to stay in our lane when it comes to some of this stuff. You just don't understand it. There's too many misconceptions, as if we're the ones that aren't paying for all of this. You know, instead of confronting these issues, they just pivot to fear. And I think that that's just so pathetic. It's so pathetic. They call it a dangerous narrative. It's not a dangerous narrative.
No,
they
it's
act
not.
like
It's the
praising
correct
small
one.
teams is going to somehow destroy people's careers, which is not going to happen. I mean, it probably will in some cases. Again, we're going back to that difference.
I disagree with him. It will destroy the careers of a lot of parasites. But fuck it. Acolytes, honestly, why would I care? Let the parasites get eaten. Then they have at least... I mean, don't get me wrong, the parasites are also a bit useful. I mean, we still need McDonald's workers. Simple as that.
Between talent and skill, but now they're looking in another direction. They're saying that the reason why you're upset isn't because these games are bad. It's because, well, you're ignorant to how they're made. Now, before writing for this video, I actually came across something that kind of supports this entire narrative. And that article, while probably not written with bad intentions, highlights one of the biggest problems with modern games journalism and developer outreach. They completely ignore the player's perspective and
Yes.
they downplay frustration. And in doing so, they end up gaslighting themselves, the developers, and the audience into believing that if we just understood how hard game development is, then we would stop asking questions. We would stop
We
complaining
understand.
about some of these things
That's
that we
why.
just apparently don't understand. That if we just saw the complexity, then maybe we would have some empathy. In an article written by Austin...
Oh, come on. Legendary drops. Come on. Come on, dude. By the way, Acolytes, if you want to know, with the big boat, the Flying American here, you don't have to, or it depends if you unlocked it. Because normally you don't have to go out of Escova. You can, in fact, you don't have to go to the water to actually pick this stuff up. You just have to fly over it, press it, he goes up again and continues to fly. Yes, that works. I'm not sure if you have to unlock it or not, but I know it works that way.
Wood of Games Radar titled "We Cough Up a Chunk of Our Soul."
It's quick.
32 game devs, from Dune's John Romero to Helldivers 2 and Palworld leads, explain what people get wrong about games. They write, games put in a lot of effort into teaching you how they work, but just enough to get you comfortable in the driver's seat. This is the gas, your brake, your clutch. Here's what you need to operate this thing. But under the hood, the belts and tanks and pumps and the very appropriate engine, you don't need to worry about those. It's not even your car. Nobody expects players to have developer level knowledge about games, but because games don't dwell on this stuff, because as a player, you only get a driver's view, and because most studios rarely explain these elements, shout out to the blogs, threads, and GDC talks that do, there are a lot of misconceptions about how games are made. As a result, a lot of people who love games set themselves up for disappointment or frustration with skewed expectations or assumptions. I thought it'd be interesting to unpack some of those misconceptions since I don't have dev level knowledge either. I approached this the only way that I know how. I asked over 40 developers from around the world, most of them quoted in this story, some inspiring separate stories, one simple but big question. What is something that you would like to clear up that people, especially players, misunderstand about how games are made? What follows in this article is a broad collection of developer quotes, over 40 in total, meant to pull back the curtain on how games are made and why so many players, in their view, get it wrong. The responses range from anywhere from thoughtful to defensive, but the reoccurring theme is clear. Game development is chaotic, fragile, deeply emotional, and far more difficult than players give it credit for. Gabe Cazzulo, developer of Ape Out and Baby Steps, led with the claim that video games just don't want to exist. They do everything wrong. We just kind of tear them into shape. Johan Pielstedt of Helldivers 2 argues that players don't realize how interconnected and fragile design choices are, that changing one thing can trigger cascading consequences across the game. He compares game development to film direction, but with the added complication that developers have to build the actor from the ground up before they can even begin. Others go on to echo this.
I don't care. Acolytes. If I'm a butcher and the meat isn't good, that also brings out a lot of complications. Doesn't mean that the customer has to suffer under it. I won't serve the dried up or just not dried up, blighted meat just because it's complicated. No, you just don't do it. You serve something better or different. It doesn't matter how hard behind the scenes the entire thing is. Nobody cares. And nor should anybody care. Okay, to a certain degree you can respect it, but if the product is bad, fuck you. Simple as that. If my product suffers just because 50 people had to freaking tinker around with this thing, I don't care. If it's a worse product, I don't care. Get the fuck out.
Darius says that players underestimate the hidden complexity behind a simple feature. Barrett Foddy claims that developers are partly to blame for the disconnect because players don't ever get to see anything past the most fun or glamorous parts. John Romero expands on this further, saying that game development isn't like building a house. It's not linear. It's an iterative process where changes in one system can break another. Even when a game technically works, it might still not be fun, and finding that fun can take years. From there, the article starts shifting towards
Then you're
defending
just bad
collaborative
at your job.
structures of large teams. Developers from the game Possessors, a group from Devolver Digital, argue that many players don't understand how many disciplines touch even a single moment in a game like a boss fight. They emphasize that adding people to a team doesn't always make development faster and that communication can become an obstacle. More developers then chime in about the dangers of oversimplifying development timelines. Bucky of Palworld says that people assume that updates can be done in days when in reality a single new island might take half a year to build. He talks about hostile comments before content even ships and how hard it is to explain the timeline to frustrated players. Towards the end, the article opens up more personally. Several devs express their frustrations at being accused of laziness or incompetence, as Mansky criticizes the idea that tutorials or Unity experience somehow makes players qualified to judge production complexity, arguing that simple fixes are rarely simple. Brenda Romero then adds a humanizing note at the end, saying that even failed launches are the result of teams coughing up a chunk of their soul. Now, I skimmed through most of this article for your sake and mine because while there are a few genuinely insightful comments that are buried in there, the overall message is pretty clear. Have empathy, understand our struggle, be patient. But here's the thing, this isn't a support group, guys. It's a business, and no amount of goodwill is going to make players feel better about paying $80 for broken launches, gutted franchises, and a menu that is filled with microtransactions. This entire piece tries to sound like it's informative, like it's giving players a peek behind the curtain, but the real function is much softer. It's recontextualizing criticism as misunderstanding. It's reframing negative player sentiment as a byproduct of ignorance, not a signal that something is going wrong. Look, man, I get it. Developers are under pressure, but players are too. We're the ones that are risking our money, our time, and our loyalty, yet somehow it's always us that are the ones that are expected to be more patient, more forgiving, more empathetic. That empathy never seems to go the other direction. We're always told that we need to understand the complexity, but when we ask for basic communication or transparency, suddenly it's not our place. We're not heartless. Most players already know that
gamers are the freaking one of the most forgiving bunch in this world. You can fuck up 20 times in a row, then you come with one good thing out, and people will freaking suck it up, and suddenly you're good again. Or sometimes you can suck for years and people will still buy it. Yeah, no, we're already forgiving enough. Too much, I would argue, acolytes. Never be forgiving to this degree as a gamer is to his favorite franchise. Never. That's just too much. It's a detriment to you.
Game development is hard. We know that changes can take time. We know that there's pressure and burnout and creative compromises that have to be made, but that knowledge does not obligate us to patience. This is a transactional relationship. Players are paying more than ever for products that feel increasingly more incomplete. That's not empathy fatigue. That's consumer expectations. Johan Pielstad of Helldivers 2 weighed in here, understandably frustrated by player demands after their sudden success. But most of those requests were not outrageous. They were baseline features, industry staples, stuff that people reasonably expected at launch, like a game that didn't break the minute that you fired it up. I get that that success caught that studio off guard, but if you can't deliver on what players want after launch, that's not our failure to empathize. That's your missed opportunity.
I'm sorry about that. I forgot to turn on my mic because of the Dogs of War. But what I wanted to say, a lot of those things just aren't. The developers of Helldivers were at some point it was a fault of their own, and some of them, PlayStation, Xbox, I don't remember what this was, but the account thing. I stopped playing Helldivers after they demanded an account. Point. I don't want that. And this is a criticism or a thing that if I have to do that, I'm just going to exclude the game. Except it's really, really good, then I may consider it. But if I hear that, I'm just going to go out. Not going to play it just because of that. And that's a critic of mine, acolytes. I'm not saying that it's the best thing or it's good or bad, but that's just how I think about it.
You have to meet that moment. You can't fumble it. And when you fumble it, you can't go and then blame the audience for noticing.
Correctly.
I think Once Human's another really good example of this. That game saw huge player numbers at launch, but players were already warning the developers about seasonal resets months before that game even launched into alpha. I interviewed their
Correctly.
team recently, and they just told me flat out that they heard the criticism, but they couldn't do anything about it. The game's entire foundation, its content model, its monetization structure was built around those seasonal resets. And while they did eventually fix that, it took nearly a year for them to do so. But from a player's perspective, that's not a fix. That is a delayed acknowledgement of something
Correctly.
that shouldn't even have been there in the first place. I think that Elden Ring Night Rain is a really good example of what I mean by how these guys just do not want to see our perspective on things. No voice chat, no text chat, no crossplay, practically no communication tools at all. And while I get that FromSoft's engine was never built for persistent co-op, and maybe they're just stress testing netcode through this release, probably trying to get things ready for Duskbloods, it still doesn't matter. Those features are a standard. We see how successful they are. We know they have the resources. So when those basic features are missing, it's not a technical limitation. It feels like a choice.
Laziness.
Frustrating,
Choice.
out
Okay,
of touch
he's very
choice.
sad about it.
That's why we're seeing more developers step forward with these appeals to empathy. The dialogue is shifting. It's making these guys feel uncomfortable. Players today are more vocal, more direct, and more willing to push back against some of these games. And while I don't think that this article was written maliciously, a lot of its tone mirrors this industry-wide discomfort and this desire to obfuscate accountability. There's that line from the article, "You don't need to worry about that. It's not even your car." The fuck it isn't. We paid for it. All of it. These games only exist because we are willing to buy them. And if that car keeps breaking down, we have every right to ask what went wrong or walk away entirely.
Yes.
Pretty much for the entire top end of this industry, their priorities shifted from the players to their scale. Because their scale is something that is justified by, their budget is justified by their scale. They need the budget, they need the funding, because that funding and that budget then leads to more money that those guys get to make, especially for executives and CEOs and people of that sort. And the problem is that when all of your focus is shifted to just the scale of your company, the product suffers as a result of it. Because the core
Fair
creatives
enough,
that
yes.
you had originally, the ones that built a lot of our favorite franchises, become buried under layers of labor. You can't hear them anymore. Their creativity doesn't shine the same way that it used to. That's one of the reasons why a lot of these indie games have struck a chord with a lot of players, is because of the fact that these guys do not have any time to do anything else other than pay attention to their game. They don't even have the players yet, so they're not even thinking about you. They're just thinking about this game. And is it cool? Is it fun? Are people going to enjoy it? I hope that they do. And then they find out that, yeah, in fact, we do. And the more that we speak out about these games, the more that we notice a lot of these different issues and we vocalize them, the more uncomfortable that this industry is going to get. It's going to get really uncomfortable for them in the future, because this is something that's kind of crazy. I was talking to a few people behind the scenes, and I had 2 videos about Ubisoft back to back. They got over 1.5 million views. Those videos were brought up and discussed in an investor meeting. That's trouble. Because those videos were specifically talking about their loss in quality, poor management, things like that. Nothing to do with any like social issues or anything like that. It's just literally, hey, your games used to be this. Now your games are this, and they suck. And people aren't buying them, and people aren't interested in them anymore. And for Ubisoft and for a lot of these AAA companies, they don't know how to deal with that because it's never happened before. We haven't had that kind of power. We haven't had that kind of reach.
No.
You're going to see a lot more of this.
We always had the power to do this. We just didn't use it. That's all.
You're going to see a lot more people pushing back on some of these different criticisms that people make. They're going to try to educate players more. You're going to see more people trying to appeal to empathy. Part of it is going to be for job security, but in a lot of cases, it's because all the noise that we're making is forcing changes upon them. As much as I criticize this industry for being investor-led in a lot of cases, those investors, when they hear about some of these things, they're going to come across some of it for sure. The louder the players are, the worse that these games perform, the more likely they are to see what the players are saying about them. And these guys are just as uneducated and result-driven as we are. And what's going to end up happening is these guys are going to have a lot less excuses and a lot more results. They have to recognize that the curtain's already been pulled back. And it's been pulled back for a long time, but it's always... It's been pulled back on the one thing that actually matters to players, and it's how much money these guys are making off of us and how much pressure that they are exerting on their audience financially.
No. The only thing that gamers care about is this product good. Or it's the top thing. The second thing is then, can I afford it? But is it good is the first and foremost.
which is a lot. Game prices keep going up. It is the most popular talking point that I know of right now. Everybody has been discussing it. Monetization's another one of those as well. And these studios have to justify those prices because they need them to be able to sustain their scale. The problem is we don't like these games. We don't like these prices. And now we're questioning their scale. Something's going to have to give. Something's going to have to bend. Something's going to have to break. And I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think it's going to be the players. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did enjoy the video, like the channel, subscribe to the channel.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, let's just say it. Good video. Very well done. And at the end of the day, let's just hope for the best. And that people just, well, don't buy this shit. But as it is, acolytes, good night.